So in this video I want to talk you through how to move your analysis from where it currently is to the top grade, so an A grade. I think before you do that it's important to keep a very close eye on the criteria, because this is the criteria in which your examiner, your teachers, the moderators at the exam board, this is the criteria they will be looking at you being able to meet. Now of course for the top mark you need to be aiming for level 4, so those points there highlighted in green, they're the key words really, the action points that you need to have in your essay. So you need to show that you have a detailed and thorough knowledge of the text, so knowledge of the videos. You need to have an insightful analysis and an insightful interpretation. So you need to show that you've really thought about it and engaged with it and considered whether or not you think the representations in there are accurate or whether they're challenging what we traditionally believe. It says there still you need a very good understanding of the representation of social and cultural messages. So whether it is showing society as we think it is or it's challenging society as we think it is. You need a very good knowledge and understanding of the codes and convention of those music videos. So the features of those music videos that should be there and where they're not there, why they're not there. You need an accurate use of terminology, whether that is mise-en-scène and the aspects that make up mise-en-scène, such as lighting and props and costume, or whether it's sound or camera work. You need to be making sure you're using that terminology throughout your essay. You also need a very good understanding of the effects on audiences. Now note that word there, effects, that implies more than one effect. So the effect won't be simply the same effect for everybody, but it could be different depending on who you are, what generation you are. It also says that you need an appropriate use of examples to support your points. So that means some specific examples that you've taken directly from the music video. Much the same in English how you'd use a quotation. And you also need your own personal engagement. So you need to actually have an opinion about the things that you've read. This can be broken down really into these few areas. I won't bore you by reading them again, but it would be very worth you pausing the video and making sure that you both A, have these in your work, but B, that you can remember them. Okay, so having a look at this example. It does say example 2, but I think we know it's example 1. Now it says, in the Dizzee Rascal video, the characters are clearly represented in a way which is stereotypically expected of youth culture, particularly London gang culture. They look dangerous and aggressive. However, this stereotypical representation is subverted by the actions of the group. They aggressively look at the shop, and it appears that they will throw a steel bin through the window. However, it soon becomes clear that the bin is full of soapy water, and the gang are charging at the shop with sponges in their hands to clean the window. This use of humour engages the audience because it breaks away from what they expect. I think this is a good technique because gangs are presented very negatively across the media, but it is because they have been stereotyped that people automatically have a negative idea of them. Now on the face of it, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that paragraph there. It's worth remembering at this point that this is only a section of the essay. You would obviously need to have another video to compare it to. But at the moment there are some very strong features of this paragraph. For example, there's a good discussion of the stereotypes expected. So for example, the London gang culture as is mentioned there. There's also a very clear signal to your examiner that you are identifying the area being represented. So again, youth culture, gang culture. In this extract here, this bottom section, there is a very good knowledge of the text shown. And you are recognising that the stereotype is being challenged. Again in this section, there is an explanation of the impact on the audience. Now what I would say is where the knowledge of the text is being shown, actually it's a little bit too much narrative. So your examiner will probably have seen the video. They won't need you to tell them blow by blow what happens in that video. The real problem actually in this essay are sentences, for example this one here. They look dangerous and aggressive. Yes they do, but how? How are they being represented? You need to be specific. It could be their mise-en-scène, so in this example it is the fact that the guy in the video wears a hoodie, he wears a bandana. The camera angles show close-ups, the close-up of the mobile phone saying riot. We know that this is how they're being represented, this is how they are being constructed, it's how they're being made to look. Again here, they look dangerous and aggressive. Really? Yeah they do, but why? So you'd use a sentence such as, because the close-up of his face or the man's face reveals that he I don't know, perhaps is staring intently at the shop. Perhaps he's covering his face. Okay, so with this in mind, we can look at the A* example. Now this example, obviously the first thing you'll notice is that it's longer, but when you read through it, you'll realise it's got those things of the success criteria embedded in there, such as the terminology, the impact on the reader or audience, the personal engagement. So if we read it through, it says, in the Dizzee Rascal video, the characters are clearly represented in a way which is stereotypically expected of youth culture, particularly London gang culture. So we've seen that actually in the last paragraph. There's nothing wrong with that bit. Their mise-en-scène is typically of this social group. They wear hoodies, and Dizzee Rascal himself wears a black hoodie. The colour black stereotypically connotes evil or mystery. This, combined with the red baseball cap, represents Dizzee as a dangerous character in the video. Red has connotations of danger. This links with the representation of London gang culture because they are stereotypically represented as dangerous. They look dangerous and aggressive, which was suggested from the start of the video by the close-up on the mobile phone and the text, which said riot. I think this video is very clever because these things make it almost impossible for the audience not to have the most obvious interpretation that the gang is going to be dangerous. However, this stereotypical representation is subverted by the actions of the group. They throw water at the shop window and clean it. This use of humour engages the audience because it breaks away from what they expect. I think it is a good technique to use because gangs are presented very negatively across the media, but it's because they have been stereotyped that people automatically have a negative idea of them. The jump cut to the medium shot of the shopkeeper shows that even he is surprised by their actions. Okay, so if we look through this a little bit more closely, we should be able to see why it's a better example than the first paragraph we looked at. So if we look obviously at the first bit, we don't have an awful lot of problem with that. It's still identifying the identity being represented, so the London gang culture, London youth culture. That bit, absolutely fine. This bit here is where it starts to get better. So you can see already the candidate here is talking about their mise-en-scène. So they're already explaining the representation in the extract using terminology. They're already looking at the codes and conventions of the video and how that representation is being constructed. So here it says they wear hoodies and Dizzee Rascal himself wears a black hoodie. Then the candidate again goes into the significance of that colour black and suggesting evil or mystery. The candidate here again is interpreting and analysing the connotations of specific mise-en-scène. So the colour of the cap being red, and it's also linked to its wider cultural messages. So how this idea of danger is linked to London gang culture because London gangs are considered dangerous. And again, the candidate moves on looking very closely at specific examples from the clip using terminology. So the candidates moved to camera angles and said very clearly there it's the use of a close-up. Again, in this second half of the paragraph, there's a personal opinion and insight being shared from the candidate. I think this video is very clever, and then it's evaluative. It's almost impossible to escape the obvious interpretation. The candidate here is also evaluating the impact on the audience. So it's talking about the idea of the use of humour and how the representation has been subverted from this humour and how it's breaking away from what they expect. Again, it's detailed understanding of the text and insightful engagement with it, insightful engagement with the way this representation is being challenged. Lastly, there's a focus on a third technical aspect, so editing. The candidate here mentions the use of a jump cut to a medium shot, so linking again back to this camera work too. So the use of terminology here is both very thorough and very accurate.